Pues nada, estoy ya con Luis.
Buenas tardes. Ante todo, pues gracias por estar aquí. Además, antes de un puente, ¿no?, como el que tenemos ahora, muchos pues estáis ya pensando en iros y en un poco pues, desconectar. Vamos a tener la gran suerte de contar con dos profesores que trabajan en el Departamento de Justicia Criminal en la Universidad de Springfield, Illinois, y de alguna forma nos van a permitir tener información de cómo funciona allí la criminología y nos van a explicar aspectos que nos pueden ser realmente interesantes. Pensar que el índice de criminalidad es mayor y es distinto en Estados Unidos porque tienen pues, otro tipo de regulación, tienen más acceso a las armas de fuego que tenemos nosotros y funciona de otra forma. Entonces, nos van a ir explicando algunos de estos aspectos que nos pueden ser muy interesantes. Y yo soy profesor en psicobiología, yo trabajo en neurociencias y bueno, algunos de vosotros vinisteis a la conferencia el otro día que con el Ateneo, hablo de vuestras caras, y sabéis que un poco la visión que yo estoy impulsando, lo que yo estoy lanzando, es lo que es lanzarnos hacia un futuro en el que la neurocriminología tenga un papel importante, en el que empecemos a considerar los aspectos psicobiológicos que estáis estudiando con la profesora Concepción Blasco y que de alguna forma pues yo creo que van a marcar el futuro de la criminología porque no los podemos obviar. Nunca es un determinismo, pero sí que es un papel importante el que los consideremos junto a los sociológicos, culturales y psicológicos. Bien, los profesores, el profesor Ryan Williams y el profesor Schnerby nos contarán un poco, nos harán un resumen de cuáles son las relaciones, porque han trabajado durante mucho tiempo, mucha investigación, entre lo que son la relación de la policía con las personas que delinquen y cuál sería el rol de la empatía. Van a hacer una exposición aproximadamente de 45 minutos, 50 minutos, y después las preguntas que tengáis, yo creo que es una buena oportunidad para que las hagáis. Deciros también que hemos firmado un acuerdo bilateral entre universidades, lo que el profesor Ryan y yo, para posibilitar lo que es una colaboración y en la que podría tener cabida algún intercambio también de estudiantes. Entonces, si alguien estuviera muy interesado, pues yo creo que es una oportunidad de que sepáis qué se hace allí, qué se puede hacer y demás. Bien, no sé si tenéis alguna cuestión, alguna pregunta. La conferencia es en inglés. Yo pensaba que hablabais todos inglés, me ha dicho la profesora Concepción que algunos tenéis problemas, pero bueno, más o menos. Si lo entendéis, y yo creo que los tenemos que lanzar porque sabéis que la comunicación mundial hoy por hoy el idioma científico y académico es el inglés, entonces tenemos que ir hacia él. ¿Alguna pregunta, alguna duda? Okay, so thank you very much for being here, Professor Ryan Williams and Professor Stephen Schnerby. We are so happy that you can explain how you work at your department and what's the main conclusion of your research. So please feel free to explain what the aspects you prefer, and we'll be so happy. Thank you.
Gracias, thank you. Welcome everyone. Thank you to Luis for inviting us to your wonderful campus and giving us the opportunity to meet with you and talk with you and share some of our expertise with you. In the future, we would like to give this presentation in Spanish, but we apologize. Our language skills aren't what we would like them to be, so you will have to bear with us in English this time. What we would like to do this afternoon is talk a little bit about policing in the United States of America. And the way we'd like to structure our talk today is like a lecture that we would give at our university to our students. We'll talk a little bit about the research literature as it relates to the police and the public, in particular the relationship between the police and the public in America, a very difficult relationship right now. And we will talk a little bit about some of the ways that we might improve the relationship between police and citizens in America. And we'd like to begin our discussion by highlighting a recent example of a police shooting. A police officer shot and killed an American citizen, and it was widely publicized across America. In fact, I searched for the Moderé newspaper, and it actually made the news here in Europe and in Spain as well. So I'll hand it over to my colleague, and he'll talk a little bit about this single incident of police violence against citizens, and then we'll expand a little beyond that to try to talk about the relationship in general between American citizens and their police.
First, before I talk, again, I apologize for only speaking English. My only Spanish I can speak is nada. But I would like to thank Dr. Moya-Albiol for having us both visit. It's a wonderful city, pretty incredible campus. You were very lucky to have that professor as someone you could take courses with. Very well respected in his area of expertise, so we would like to thank him for having us here. We've had a wonderful trip. As Dr. Schnerby was saying, this summer, a very not uncommon, a very common occurrence, a shooting by police of a young African American male or black male. Michael Brown was his name, in Ferguson, Missouri, near St. Louis, Missouri, suburb of St. Louis, poor community, large African American population, and at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, lunchtime, middle of the day, Michael Brown was walking with a friend on the street, and a police officer drove his car behind him, told him and his friend to get off the street. At that point, lots of different stories about what happened, different versions. But what we know for sure is that in the end, Michael Brown was shot 6 times by the police officer. Most witnesses say that he had his hands up and was unarmed, no gun on him. His friend that was with him recounted his story, told his story, and ran away. What this incident represents is it brought to light, it exposed a very, very long existing relationship between the police and certain communities in the United States, between a bad relationship between citizens and police, a very non-trusting relationship, and as we'll see, a very violent relationship between the police, who are supposed to serve and protect, it says on the car, serve and protect, but that is not what is happening in these parts of our cities in the United States. So we'll talk a little bit about this problematic relationship between poor, minority, inner city, usually young people, and that problematic relationship with the police.
Thank you. What we have on the screen is one of the numerous media images of the public protests that arose as a result of this shooting that we've referred to. In the city of St. Louis, which happens to be near our campus, about 90 miles away from our campus, the shooting of Michael Brown generated a great public outrage. Because again, there is a long history in America of young black males being treated poorly by the police. But what we find is that poor relationships with the police have extended and expanded to a much more substantial problem. And we feel that that problem has much to do with the way the police see themselves in America and how the way they see themselves differs from what Americans want their police to be. But before we get into ways to change American police, what we would like to do is give you a little bit of background information on policing in America. You may not be familiar with the types of policing or even the sheer number of police. We'd also like to talk a little bit about levels of crime in the United States. Most Europeans know that crime is high in America, in particular violent crime, and more specifically, violent gun crime. America is the land of the pistola and the machine gun and gun violence. So what we'd like to do, and these are very simple sort of visual aids, is to give you some information on the extent and the nature of policing in the United States. For example, what we find in the United States are police departments that operate at multiple government levels. We have federal police, similar to Spanish Policía Federales, what you may have known as the FBI, CIA, and a variety of other federal agencies. We're not going to talk much about the federal agencies because they focus on very specific types of crime. But what we're going to emphasize are what we call local police departments and their relationships with the citizens in those cities. But also the relationships between citizens and their state police. We find that in America there are a large number of police agencies across our 50 states. In fact, you can see up here there are 18,000 individual separate police departments. Most of these departments are very, very small. 1, 2 officers, police officers at most. What you see on American television, New York City Police, Chicago Police, LAPD, Los Angeles Police, those are very, very large departments. Chicago Police, which is a city 3 hours north of our campus in Springfield, has approximately 32,000 police officers, a vast number of police. There are many police in America relative to other places in the world, and many would argue that's because we have a great deal of crime. 1.1 million total police officers. These are state or city police officers. We also have what we call private police. These are security officials, individuals who are not paid by the government, but rather paid by individual companies, corporations. The total, once you add the private to the public police, is well over 2 million. In relation to the US population, which is 316 million, you can see that there are many, many, many police officers roaming around the United States. And again, many people would argue that is because America has so much crime. And we do have a great deal of crime. Last year, the United States experienced over 16,000 murders, homicides. 5.2 homicides per 100,000 persons is the murder rate for the United States. And while that is exceptionally high relative to European nations, it is a number that, relative to the recent past in America, is very, very low. Crime has been declining in the United States, property crime, violent crime, for 15, 20, 25 years. But nonetheless, many, many murders. And as you see on the overhead, many of the violent crimes, and these murders in particular, involve a firearm, typically a handgun. Of the 16,000 murders, 11,068 involved a firearm. Handgun violence is a major problem in America. Firearm ownership in America, gun ownership, is very, very high. We spoke to some students yesterday and we told them, I think to their surprise, that there are 316 million people in America and there are more than 316 million guns. We have more guns than we do citizens. So as you would expect, gun violence is a big problem. The question that we need to ask is, do high levels of crime relate to the problem we find in terms of the relationship between the police and the public? In other words, is the poor relationship between citizens and the police due to the high levels of crime? We might expect that in places with lots and lots of crime, citizens would not like their police. They wouldn't feel protected. They wouldn't trust them. Perhaps they might fear for their safety. Police might believe that they could be victimized by citizens. And in some cases there are, as we'll see in a minute. But also, in America, citizens are worried that their police will victimize them. As we discussed earlier in the case of Michael Brown, it is not at all unusual for police to shoot and kill suspected criminals. Many of those shootings are justified, self-defense, for example. But many are not nearly as clear. So I can turn it over to Ryan, and we can talk a little bit about the levels of crime, if you will, that occur between police and citizens.
And one more thing about a little history and why the Ferguson incident was important was after the shooting, as Stephen said, many protests. The community, the local community only, it took a long time for the country to start being upset. We're protesting. Very comparable, very mild, very small protests. No real violence. Maybe no different than a football game in Europe. Lots of people, some bottles being thrown. That very low level of protest was met with a very high level of military response. Not by the Army, not by the Marines, but by the local small police department, who came out with snipers, tanks, mine-resistant vehicles. A lot of equipment that was used in Iraq and Afghanistan by the Americans was then shipped back home and used in these small police departments. They gave for free. You can have. So that strong militaristic response scared and woke up a lot of Americans who did not know that this type of equipment existed inside their communities. The campus where we teach, one of the campuses, they have one of these vehicles that their campus police use. No one knew this until this incident brought this information. So as we were saying, the police do have a dangerous job. They will tell us that all the time, that their job is very dangerous. But is by nowhere near one of the most dangerous jobs in America. For example, garbage men are killed on the job in America more than police officers. Garbage men? Taxi drivers, a cab driver, are killed on the job more frequently than police officers. Those people have very dangerous jobs. I used to work at the border guard when I was a student. Canada and the United States. I worked on the border. I did not have a gun. My uncle, my mother's brother, was a mounted police officer, a Mountie in Canada, and he died doing his job. He was killed on the job. But he was killed like most police officers are killed, in a traffic accident, driving and was hit on the highway. Most police officers who do die on the job do not die from citizens shooting them. In 2013, there were, in the United States, 111 police officers who died while doing their job in the United States. 111. Of those people, only 33 were killed by citizens. So if you look at these big numbers, the total number of police who are killed by citizens is very, very small. Very small. And it has been getting smaller ever since the 1970s. There are a lot fewer officers who die doing their jobs, who are killed by citizens today than there was 40 years ago.
Yeah, in fact, the numbers of police who are shot and killed by citizens is actually as low as it's been since the U.S. has been keeping records, starting in 1880. So when we compare the relatively low risk that citizens pose to the well-being of the police, simply put, citizens very rarely kill the police. Well, we ask, how often do police kill citizens? As we see up here, the estimate ranges greatly. In the United States, we are very embarrassed and very sad to say that we don't know how many citizens are killed each year by our police officers. We can only estimate. As we saw earlier, there are 18,000 individual police departments. None of these departments are required, are obliged to report whether or not they murder, in essence, a citizen during the course of their activities. In fact, only 750 departments report their data to the U.S. government. And based on these reports, we can only estimate how often citizens are killed by their police. Again, somewhere between 400 incidents to 1,000. What we do know, however, is that of those citizens who are killed by police officers, a majority of those citizens are young black males. If you are a young black male in America, you are much, much, much more likely to be shot and killed by the police than you are if you are any other type of person in the country. So one of the things that Dr. Williams and I are interested in is, given that there is a great deal of violence between police and citizens, especially as it directs from the police to citizens, and given that America has a historically troubled relation with its police, what we would like to do is try to identify some of the problems that are associated with policing in America, and at the same time talk about what some proposed solutions are. Criminal justice and criminology as an academic discipline has existed in the United States for a relatively short period of time. About 1965, the late 60s are when criminology and criminal justice sprung out of, was developed from sociology. So we've only been studying the police and citizens for a relatively short time. But that said, we have generated in that time a great deal of evidence, empirical, scientific evidence, data, based on surveys, and sometimes experiments that we can use to help guide American criminal justice policy, that we can use to shape the way that the police do their job, that we can use to improve police and citizen relations. What we're going to talk about are what some of those proposed solutions are, what the research tells us about police-citizen relations, but also what some of the obstacles to implementing these solutions happen to be. Because as much as we might know how to fix a problem, we're not always able to implement the solution that we know must be present. As we'll talk about, the police in America are a very powerful group. They're a very resilient group. They're a very unique group. And they are very unwilling to change. But they have to, because at present, Americans are becoming increasingly dissatisfied with our police and the way that we are policed. So when we talk about how to improve police-citizen relations, I think the first thing that we need to share with you is a little something about what the police do in America. What is their job? How do they spend their hours during the week? Most Americans don't know the correct answer to the question, what do the police do? And that's because most Americans' perceptions, knowledge of the police comes from television, crime dramas. Perhaps you've seen some of these here in Spain, movies that deal with crime and criminal justice. The general portrayal of the police in America is that of crime fighters. In essence, similar to the gunfighting sheriff of the Old West movies in America. You go out and you arrest criminals. You shoot the bad guy. You fight crime. Many Americans believe that's what police do when they clock in, when they go to their jobs in the morning, that they're crime fighters, that their job is to arrest and to punish and to identify criminals, and that that's how they spend their time. Research has revealed that, in reality, policing in America is far less exciting. Most police officers spend very, very little crime making arrests, busting perpetrators, as we would say in America. In fact, crime fighting is a very extremely small part of the police role. The typical police officer in America makes less than one serious crime arrest per month. That amounts to less than 12 arrests per year. So if they're not out arresting criminals all day long, what are they doing? How do they spend their time? Well, in American policing, the primary duty is what we call patrol. Getting in a police car and driving around, looking for crime and criminals. As you might imagine, the only crime and criminals you will find are those who are not very good at being criminals, because they are doing crime in public where the police can find them. Thus, the police spend most of their time doing what we call service and responding to calls for service. In America, we have a telephone number called 911. I think there's something similar in Europe. An emergency number. If your cat gets stuck in a tree, if you are locked out of your house, if you lock your keys in your car, which I've done several times, you call an emergency number to bring the police to help you, to provide basic public services. That's what American police do most of the time. They're very rarely in danger. They're very rarely interacting with dangerous criminals. They typically drive around in their cars, sit around in their cars, and when they're not doing that, they spend a great deal of time doing paperwork. For those of you who know a police officer, most of perhaps the most boring part of what they do is paperwork, filling out forms, arrest records, arrest data. American policing, while many people think that it is this glamorous, exciting, fun job, it is in fact quite pedestrian, quite simple. It involves providing basic services to the public until the day that you do encounter a serious criminal, until the day that you do encounter, for example, a bank robber or an armed drug dealer. And at that point, the job changes substantially. For that moment, you must be the Wild West armed sheriff. You must be the one to stop the bad guys. And it is in those instances which police sometimes recognize well and sometimes fail to recognize that we oftentimes find some of the worst abuses of police behavior. So what we need to do in America is reshape how the police role is viewed by not only the public, but the police as well. We teach students who want to become police officers. And the reason students want to become police, the reason they tell us, is because they want to fight crime. They believe that that's what their job is, to make Americans safe, that they are a wall against wrongdoers, against bad people. And in reality, that's not accurate. We need the American public to recognize the police for what they are. In essence, social workers. That is how they spend most of their time, most of their energy engaging in official forms of social work. And we need to get police departments themselves to recognize that fact. Many police departments believe that they are crime fighters. Their relationship with citizens is not that of a social worker, but one of sort of an occupying military force. Many police in America treat citizens as insurgents, as dangerous. The police look at citizens and think, we must be on guard all the time because citizens are dangerous. Americans threaten us. They are potentially criminals, and as such, we must treat them as a threat. That is the mindset of a crime fighter, and we must change it in America so that instead of viewing citizens as threatening, they view them as colleagues, as equals, as partners to solve social problems. Because American police are well suited, some would argue, to solve social problems through social work activities. And history indicates that American police are not effective at actually fighting crime. They simply don't have the capacity. They rely too much on citizens, and when citizens don't have a good relationship with the police, then the police become even less effective. So the relationship between citizens and the public must be strong if the police hope to have any success at all, and what success they can have will be more in the area of service than law enforcement.
And I think that's why, this is where maybe we have a connection with this class, and your professors and their research, is the question that we always see is our students who come to university because they want to become police officers. Many departments require that you have a university degree before you apply, but not all, but many do. And we see very empathetic people. They want to help. That's why they want to become police officers. They want to help people. They want to protect people. Something happens, though, between getting the job, before they have the job, and after they have the job. Very quickly, something changes. And that's what we are interested in, is that process we call it in sociology acculturation, getting used to a new culture and how that changes how you behave. As we said before, the police want to help citizens, and many of the citizens, the people in these high crime communities, want the police to come help them. In fact, they call the police more than people outside of these communities who don't have problems with the police. But when the police do arrive in their communities, they often find themselves arrested or harassed or sometimes shot. So we are interested in what happens during training, when police get trained. And in some ways, they are trained to not be empathetic. Empathy is seen as a weakness. It is viewed as a way of getting yourself hurt. If you are empathetic, you are going to struggle. You will not be accepted. You will work too hard. And so a lot of the academy, where the police, after university, where they learn how to shoot and handcuff and fill out paperwork, that's where a lot of this process really begins. Many citizens, when they first encounter a police officer, like we did when we are in Spain, we do not feel comfortable. When we see someone, my first observation is, do they have guns? And I was surprised that many of the officers we saw do have guns. That changes my interaction with that person. I am now a little bit afraid, even though they are supposed to be there to help me. I know they have a gun, so I respond to them in a different way. I am nervous when I'm around. Even now, I'm very nervous. I shake more than I do in class. I shake because I'm scared around customs officers, police officers who are in uniform. They understand that. During their very early stages of training, they experience hostility. Not a lot of hostility. Most citizens are not hostile, are not angry, are not mean to police. Most citizens just want to avoid them. But the one time a month where they have to make an arrest, it is not a very comfortable situation. And they have to deal with very horrible things. And part of the way they're trained to deal with those horrible things is to become callous, become hard, and ignore. They are lied to. Often, police are lied to. Even small lies. Everyone they're interacting with them is lying to them. That's their perception. That even someone telling basic truths is lying. So what they eventually, very quickly, see citizens as people who are the enemy, the insurgents, the people who want to hurt us. They band together, they develop their own friendships with each other, and do not have many friends outside of work, kind of like professors. We only hang out with professors. We only drink with professors. Police officers only associate with other police officers. They marry other police officers, brothers or sisters. So they develop this subculture of protecting each other. We almost a family. We will protect. You might have heard that term, the thin blue line. The thin blue line? No? Hollywood. They protect each other. They will lie for each other. And they will say in surveys that it's okay to lie to protect someone you work with. That it is okay, it is fine to do that. Stephen and I have had not this talk, but a similar talk with police officers. We watch police officers talk with the community, and they have no shame in telling citizens that they fear the citizens will kill them if given an opportunity. They will tell a citizen, any one of you might want to shoot me today. That establishes a very different personality trait very quickly. The question is, in the research, which is not answered, there is no answer for this research question, is that personality trait any more pathological than the general citizen? Are they any more untrustworthy? Are they any less empathetic than a professor, a grocery store clerk, a cab driver? Do they have less empathy? So that is, I think, a very important question, because the assumption is, yes, the general belief that is not tested is they are, some of them, even the officer that may have shot that is accused of shooting Michael Brown, is psychopathic, has that personality. And there is a narrative of many stories of his interactions before this that show that there might be some evidence of that. So this culture of policing that develops where they're not trusting police is sometimes amplified by more citizens having more guns. We need more police because citizens are dangerous. More citizens have more guns, we need more police. And there's a weapons race between citizens and police. Police will always win, bigger guns, more of them. But so we're interested in the culture. We're also interested in then in what ways can we circumvent, interrupt this process, this training to not have empathy? How can we stop that? A lot of it is merely because the people who become police are nothing like the people who are being policed. The people who become police in America, in art school, white, men, middle class, I don't know if that translates, middle class, who are then, maybe even where we are, very country, rural area, farming, small towns, they are then picked up and put into Chicago. And they get very afraid. They have no understanding of the community that they are supposed to be helping. None. In fact, they are told lies, and they believe them about the community that they are trying to police. So one of the suggestions is to make the police look more like the communities that they are hired to protect. I noticed when I came from Madrid first time, every car, almost, one woman, one man. I don't know if that's a rule, but I observed that. I did not in Valencia, not one woman, not one, no women, very few. So the question would be, if we hired more minorities, more African American officers who lived in the communities that had all the crime. In Ferguson, Missouri, 70% of the people who live there are black. 70. There are 53 police officers who work in Ferguson, Missouri. 3 are black. So you have a very heavily minority community being policed by mostly white officers who are not from that part of the city. That is where sometimes they went because there was a job available. they got paid to go work there. So some police departments are now assigning a quota where you have to have more African American officers. You have to have more female officers. And what we know a couple things about whether or not that's going to help. A black police officer is no less likely to be abusive towards a black citizen than a white police officer. They have just as many complaints against them as a white police officer. So as far as race, we do not see a more diverse police department helping, partly because of that process of training, that they too are trained not to trust the community. Females, women, a better story. Females officers in America are less likely to shoot citizens unfairly, unjustly. More likely to talk to them, avoid conflict. Female officers are less likely to have complaints against them by citizens. And female officers are less likely to need psychological vacation, leave, than male officers. The men are more likely to be asked to take a vacation, be put on leave, take a break. It's too stressful. The women deal with the stress better. Female officers deal with stress better than the male officers do. So just hiring more minority officers is not going to solve the problem. And a lot of our city has an a black police chief. It did. And it had the same proportions that Ferguson, Missouri did. It had about 6% of its police officers, 6 were African American, very small. And Springfield is about 25% African American. So very disproportionate.
Yeah, it's fine. Thank you, Ryan. So clearly when we look at American policing, we see issues with police culture. There are some issues with diversity. In particular, at present, 11% of American police officers are women. That is far too low of a number, and departments must make a greater effort to bring women into American policing. It's not a comfortable environment for women. Policing in America is a very male-dominated profession, extremely so, but the federal government and the state governments must act to set quotas for women, as they have done successfully so for policing in terms of race. In fact, when you look at American policing in the aggregate, 25% approximately of all American police are minorities. That is an actual overrepresentation of in the American population. So we have enacted policy to diversify along the lines of race and ethnicity, and we now must do the same in terms of gender. What we also must do is we must change the training and the educational requirements in America for our police. We know many things about the benefits of police education and the ways in which the police are trained. Unfortunately, when you look at the United States of America, what you see is that only 1 out of 3 police departments in America require a college degree in order to be employed. Typically, you only have to have completed grade 12, a high school diploma, in order to be a police officer in the States. The good news is that while that seems like a relatively small fraction of departments that require college education, it is a value that is 3 times greater than it was in 1990, we're seeing a consistent movement across law enforcement in the US to increase educational standards. And the reason that's important is because research has clearly shown that a more educated officer is a more effective officer. They generate fewer complaints, they have better critical thinking skills, they're more effective operating independently on their own. One of the unique features of American policing is a term called discretion. Discretion is much like autonomy, freedom. American police officers go to work in the morning, and the manner in which they patrol, the manner in which they do their job is decided upon by themselves. They are free to go where they want to go and do what they want to do. They have enormous freedom, autonomy to do their jobs as they see fit. Well, with that freedom comes the potential for disaster. If you give uneducated, unprepared individuals massive amounts of discretion, autonomy, freedom to do as they will, you've opened the door for mistakes, for errors. By educating our police, who, again, are very independent, we're able to create officers who can think independently, who can be creative, who can problem solve, who can analyze threats more effectively, who can analyze problems and propose solutions. So when we talk about what types of education police officers need, we're really talking about a broad higher education, collegiate, university curriculum. Some schools in the States are in essence a pre-police academy. They serve as the police academy before police academy. Universities near our campus, for example, offer classes in crime scene investigation to their university students. They offer classes in fingerprinting. They offer classes in essence, how to do the job of a police officer, the daily ins and outs of doing the job, which is unfortunate because that is exactly what those students will get when they go to a police academy. What we at our university do is take a different approach, one that I feel is a better approach. We don't teach our students how to be police officers. In fact, very far from it. We teach them how to communicate verbally through the written word. We teach them how to think critically, how to solve problems, how to analyze. Our curriculum is not focused on teaching students how to become police officers, but rather giving them the academic skills to be better police officers. And we need more of this in policing because of the importance of discretion. Police officers will independently work with citizens. If they don't possess strong communication skills, then the opportunity or the potential for miscommunication can be high. More importantly, what we need out of our students is the ability to think independently. If we're going to change police organizations, we have to do so in part by bringing in a new wave of officers who think about policing differently and who can hold on to those different ways of thinking. One of the things that we've seen is that some of our best and brightest students leave our university, and after a few short weeks on the job, we meet with them again, and much of what we've taught them about policing and citizen relations and many of their problem-solving skills have, in essence, vanished. They talk and act just like the same officers who've been on the job for 20 years. That police culture draws them in, and they can't escape from it. They adapt and become the types of officers that America has had for 40 years. So we need to instill in our students the ability to maintain the values that we can instill, the notion that the community and the citizens are more important than the police department, and that when a police officer makes a mistake, shoots a citizen illegally, or does something else illegal or wrong, that you have to take the blame as a department. That it's good for the citizens to admit we made a mistake, not to hide, not to cover up the evidence, as we've seen in Ferguson, Missouri. Again, when Ryan first described to you Ferguson and the shooting that happened that made national news, we still don't know exactly how many times this man was shot. A month, 2 months later, it's still not been publicly released because the police are, what we would say in America, circling the wagons. They're hiding. They're trying to protect themselves first. And we need to get rid of that attitude by having young officers who come in and have a different set of values, who empathize with the community first and their co-workers second, but to recognize that the community is the most important thing, and that whatever we can provide them in university can stay with them despite all the messages that they will get in police academies. One of the other things that we think we can do to help policing in America is to change the political or the bureaucratic structure of the police. In England, which American policing evolved from, they have what are called citizen review boards. In essence, the community is in charge of the police. The police chief, the top administrator of the police, which we call a chief in the United States, reports to a board of citizens, not to the mayor or to a governor, but to citizens themselves. So that when the police behave in a way that citizens don't like, the citizens can in essence fire the police. They can cut their salary. By reorienting, by changing the structure of power, and by giving citizens the power, we can leverage, we can alter the way the police are able to sort of rank what is important to them. As of now, the primary function of the police is to look out for themselves. They need to be looking out for the community first and foremost all the time.
And that's what probably one of the last couple more suggestions we have, and what we got when we really got interested kind of back into doing research. In our city, they've had a history of a lot of a lot of lawsuits against the police department. In fact, in Chicago has paid $38 million this year, the city, the taxpayers, to citizens who have been abused by police. $38 million. So it's starting to get very expensive for the police to be behaving inappropriately. So what a lot of cities and communities are doing is trying to, and what we think is a good idea if done properly, bring citizens together with police in forums much like this. Have a police officer sitting here, have the community who are the most affected by police behavior in the crowd, and start talking, because there is no communication, especially in an informal manner. Church leaders, youth pastors, grocery store owners, people who really understand what the problems are and have them talk with police. And what the police want to get, what they like, is that they can tell the citizens, here's why we had to do that. Here's why we had to shoot. Here is when we will shoot. What we found was that is not what happened during these meetings. The only people that came were older, retired, wealthier people who were bored, had nothing to do. So they came, and who liked police. They liked the police already. That's why they wanted to come see what the police did. They were met with police officers who told a story about how dangerous their jobs were, and and also how they needed more money to do a better job. So it was very unsuccessful. These meetings can get very, very tense. What we would like to do on our own campus, do you have separate police just for campus or no? No? We have every university has their own police department in the United States. So there is a University of Illinois police department, and they carry guns. What we try to teach our students is what the law is, what police are allowed to do to you, and what they are not allowed to do to you, and to report to us, just us, when something happens that you are concerned about. When a police officer breaks into your room, when a police officer searches your bag. In America, lots of concern that that is not appropriate. Under certain situations only can a police officer search your car, your bag, walk into your dormitory room, and start looking around. And so what we encourage the officers on our campus to do is talk about your protocol, talk about your rules, tell the students what their rights are and what they are allowed to do, what questions they should answer, and what questions they do not have to answer. The students really want this. The police have not helped at all. They do not want to have these discussions, partly because the police do not know their own protocol. The police do not understand what the real rules are. Part of that is the discretion. They wait until someone files a lawsuit against the officer, and then it goes to court, and then maybe we'll find out what the real rule and the real law is. One other thing that I think is very interesting for empathy that has been suggested in Ferguson is for officers to wear police cameras on their uniforms. They do have them in the cars, in their police vehicles, on the dashboard of the car, above the steering wheel. But in Ferguson, the suggestion was that it be mandatory, almost a GoPro, right? Go see them everywhere in Madrid. GoPro. Put a GoPro on your uniform, and that will help us get insight into the behavior, what is happening, evidence, but it will also make the officer maybe think twice, think about their behavior. But the most important thing would be for training. If there was an incident that was very bad, that there was harm done, someone was hurt, the officer could go back and look at the video. And with a very effective trainer, could be shown where things went wrong. This is where your behavior changed. Researchers, we would love to look at that data to see how police officers are interacting. But the police officer themselves, the department, the community could have a better, could see more what how they are behaving. The only problem is in Ferguson, officers did have body cameras. They were required to use them. And like my 10-year-old daughter, when I give her a phone, they turn them off. They shut them off. So my daughter I will not always know where my daughter is by giving her a phone. Police officers will not be under all observation because they can always turn their cameras off and say, it was broken, I forgot. What we need is a policy where if you forget, like your homework or your paper, 0, you're fired, you're sanctioned. And that is not happening. The officer that shot Michael Brown has still not been charged. No criminal charges. and this is since August. And so there is some audio and video, but it was not the officer.
Yeah, I think we're kind of at about the time limit we had anticipated. I think to just have some final comments about what we've been trying to share with you today. America is a place where crime can be very high. It is a place where there is a lot of violence. There are more guns than there are people. The view of America that the world holds is a place of dangerousness, high crime, and that is warranted. It's justified. But our police have evolved into something that is not what we want them to be. They have a role to play in America. They have an important role. Crime that is not reported to the police, in essence, cannot be processed through the criminal justice system. An armed robber who is not arrested cannot be charged and go to prison. A murderer who is not caught cannot be punished by the justice system. So the police, have an important role, but the way that they're doing their jobs in America now is not the way we need it to be. Social science, empirical evidence, has taught us that we must do things differently. There are many challenges to doing things differently, but one of the goals of our research and the goals of our educational system, in particular our criminal justice program, is to produce police officers with the mental capacity, the analytical skills, and the courage to give birth to a new form of policing in America, one that can better serve the American public and one that can serve as a model for other Western democracies around the world. We're still in the earliest stages of trying to rebuild and rework policing, but we do believe that as we continue to educate, as we continue to change police training, as we continue to hammer away at police culture and change the way the police are viewed in the minds of citizens and the government and of the police themselves, that we can make meaningful change. It won't be easy, but it is something that we believe is doable. So that concludes our comments and our side of things, but we would love to hear any questions that you might have about the American criminal justice system, policing, anything about American crime, justice, punishment, anything that you might have. We'd love to answer if we can.
Or maybe translate for the questions.
So thank you very much for the conference. It was very interesting for us. So you have any questions? I can try to translate for you maybe. If you want.
Yo creo que igual lo puedo ir en inglés.
Molt bé.
You have told us that in America there are a lot of crimes with guns. And I think that because in America is not prohibido.
It's not legal to have guns, yes.
O sea, in America is legal to have a gun. And I think that is a causa of a lot of violence. And why they don't prohibit the guns?
I'm from Canada, so. But in Canada, we have a lot of guns. Rifles, bears, elk, moose, big animals, cougars. But we have a lot of guns, but no handguns. None. Illegal. And in Canada last year, 2013, there was still 500 murders. If you took all the guns, all of those murders that used a gun, Americans still kill each other more than any other country. So we stab and choke. It's not just guns, but to ignore guns would be not appropriate, would be crazy, to use a scientific term. You have to look at the number, the pure number of guns. In where we live, in most states, in all states, you can carry citizens, professors can carry guns. Not at our school, but in many universities, professors bring guns to class. Students bring guns to class. That changes your interaction with each other. Bad grade? Not so much. But our students believe they should be allowed to carry guns. That it's more important to be allowed to carry guns than to be at risk for being killed. They hold that freedom to be more important. That's how they were raised. Culture. It is a culture. There are other countries that have cultures of violence too. Germany has a long history of violence, but not so much murders today.
I would agree. I think it's a great question, and I think Ryan and I are very sympathetic to that question because both he and I recognize that guns in America they're a public health problem. Handguns are tools to kill human beings. That's what they do. They make it easier for a human being to kill another human being, and that is all they do. As Ryan said, American culture values the freedom to own firearms above all else. It's this individuality that my personal freedom matters more than everybody's safety. I think that's wrong. I do not support so many guns. I do not own a gun. I think America is wrong to allow so much freedom for guns. That said, the research suggests that if you are a victim of crime and you defend with a gun, you are less likely to get hurt, to scare away the offender. You are less likely to have your property taken. So guns can kill people, but they can also protect people. And they are used that way effectively, but not equally effectively. Some of my research found that for a man, a gun is an effective weapon of defense. Because men in America are attacked by other men who are strangers. Imagine if you were approached by, you're a man, and you're approached by someone you don't know, and you pull a gun on that person. They're going to be scared. And they're going to run away. But for women, who are more likely to be victimized by their spouses, their significant others, novios, esposos, pulling a gun on your husband is a very different thing. Husbands tend to not be scared when they see their wife with a gun. They become angry, mad. And in fact, the research shows that women are less willing to shoot someone than men are. And you can read it in the eyes. When someone wants to shoot you, you can see it in their face. When someone is afraid, it's, don't make me shoot you. It's less of a deterrent. So even though guns can give positive things, I agree with the European view that overall they are a major problem in American society, in American culture, but I'm sad to say that they're not going anywhere. Every day, thousands and thousands are sold. Many people fear them being taken away, so they buy more. And America will be a country that is populated by more guns than people for the rest of my life? Thank you for your question. Very good.
Some other questions?
You said that people who want to become a policeman, they change very quickly before and after to be. And that can be explained by the feeling of power, of control, of domination, because they get guns. It's like they get physical power and for sure social power to the others. They're like, okay, I have a gun, I have feeling safe, but for sure control you. I can control you with my gun. And I use that because I can do that. But in the other side, if I'm afraid, I'm telling you that you can control me, so come and do that. The vulnerable, that can be explained.
Yeah, I that's what we're interested in now. There is no research on the personality type before you become an officer. Maybe these are people who want to control, who want not protect, maybe, but control, who want power. Maybe have never had power. Maybe have been bullied. Bullied? As kids, beaten up, and want power. They already have guns. All of our students who want to become police officers, they already own and often carry guns. So having the gun is nothing new. I think they expect to be treated like gods, with respect. Once I get my uniform, everyone will respect me. They don't get respect. Police officers that they are expecting. So in order to get that respect, I think what happens is they turn to force. If this isn't enough, if I have a gun and you're still not respecting me, then I will start getting physical. I will show you that I have power, and will be supported by my colleagues. So I think you're right. I think we still need to find out what that personality type is.
I think it also has to do with the fact that new officers feel very cut off from the rest of society. When, and Ryan referenced this, and maybe you all feel the same way, when you see a police officer, you may act different around them. You behave, you sit up and you buckle your seatbelt, and if you behave. If you've been drinking, you try to act sober. People behave differently around the police because the police have power. But that behaving differently alienates police. And in response to that, they feel alone, and they turn to other police to find social support. And as such, they become more quickly acculturated. They more quickly become like the other police because they feel they've been so isolated from the rest that they must have that societal support, so they turn to the police, and it's a cycle that reinforces that existing culture. I agree with the dominance component, but it also has to do with the social isolation, I believe, as well. Again, a great question. Thank you. We had one other question, I think. Perhaps? Pregunta?
Oh, it was very similar.
Okay.
It's the same in the US.
Oh, well, yes, I'm gonna say it.
Please, please.
Can you say that these attitudes against citizens from police are a state's responsibility? Like, if you say that the training is that hard that they can create like a wash brain or something,
Mm-hmm.
that can create that, how can you say, feeling against the citizen, like a threat, like the enemy. So is the state responsible of that? Is the state responsible of the killing, of the shooting of innocent people?
Set the camera off. Of course, and that's where these lawsuits come into play. But I think that is a very important question that people need to look into. The problem is it's virtually impossible to have access to this training. Researchers are not welcome in police departments. Not welcome. We have to have two personalities, and it's hard to be friendly with police and then criticize police. They don't. We have a lot of students who like us, who appreciate, they remember us. So we have a few opportunities, but policing is very, very secretive. We've said here in Spain, we would, if we could speak Spanish, we would love to just walk up to a police officer and start asking questions. You can. Oh, we did not get that sense because of where we come from. That is not. A lot of people do not feel comfortable doing that, especially in the city. But I think the lawsuits, the money that cities are now being held responsible to pay for what we call wrongful death, a wrongful death suit, not a murder, legal, wrongful death, civil money, that these are making these cities look at how they are training their officers. Great question.
Amazing. I think you're right in viewing the blame at the state level. We talk about police subculture and fearing citizens. I hope we were able to communicate that it's what we call rational response. I understand why police feel alienated, because when I see a police officer, I feel alienated from him or her. I understand it, and it makes sense to me. So when an officer who's afraid makes a bad decision, it's unfortunate for them. The real responsibility belongs on the states to, as you say, change the way we train, change the way we share information with the public, because at the current way of doing things, we are, in essence, reproducing the same problem over and over again. That's a wonderful question. Thank you. Please.
Well, I'd like to know what you have to do to get into the police, and if it could be possible, if you know the difference there are between Spanish police and American police. Moreover, how the difference to get into the police between Spanish police and American police.
I guess the yes and no. We don't know the Spanish system at all, but you probably do. So we can talk about what you need in the United States. As a Canadian, you have to be a U.S. citizen in most departments because you have to carry a gun. So although there are lots of, it would be nice for Spanish students to come and work, maybe internship, experience in very exciting positions. Very difficult because you have to be a U.S. citizen. I'm assuming that's very common in most countries, and access to information. Usually there's an age limit, a minimum and a maximum. Minimum's usually 18, sometimes 40.
It's the maximum.
Is maximum.
Cannot be higher if you're 40 or older.
So very simple there. If you have, this is what we have a lot of experience with our students. If you have been arrested before, if you have a criminal record, you might not, maybe. It depends. Very subjective. It depends. Domestic violence? Nope, never. Drunk driving? Okay. When I was young, okay.
Drug felonies, if it's a serious drug crime, no. You cannot be a police officer for a serious drug crime. There are physical requirements, push-ups, you must be able to run a mile in a certain time, jump, various physical things, very, very easy physical things. And you must pass the academy, which is usually a 3-month schooling period where you learn the law and you learn police procedure, what the rights of the citizens are and what the rights of the police are. What we find is that generally the academy, the training, from what we know about it, it seems to provide an accurate picture of what police should and shouldn't do, but then the actual reality of policing is more about trying to find ways around the right way to do things, trying to be creative with the rules.
There's so many, 17,000 different police departments in the United States. They're not all the same requirements. Some are very, very, very strict. Some not so much. What is changing? More require a bachelor's, an undergraduate degree in anything. Biology, English, philosophy, doesn't have to be criminology. And that is either a requirement where you have to have that, or it is a benefit. You are more attractive to hire. But what is equally as helpful is military experience.
In America, yes.
So a US soldier who is coming back, or who came back from Iraq, applies for a job, no education outside of the military, maybe a small criminal offense in the past, goes to the top of the list, because of military experience. That is not a good idea. And nothing, some of our very strong students are former Marines. I've done research with these students. They are working with me. But as police officers, they bring that same mentality from Iraq to the United States. They are soldiers. And the citizens. There is an enemy. There must be an enemy. So we would like to see more education, and while military experience can be valuable, it should not take you straight to the top. It's good for our department because we have lots of former soldiers that want to come take criminology courses. Free. One thing that is free in America is for soldiers, their education is paid for. So it helps our department grow. But
one last comment would just be the salary for police officers. For a beginning officer, the starting salary would probably be approximately $50,000 to $55,000 American per year, with the opportunity for overtime. So if you were a police officer in America, you could easily make $70,000 in a year, and that is with full health care and benefits. They give you a car to drive all the time. So it's a very, it's become a well-paid profession in America. 30 years ago, police officers did not make much money, but they have unions, and America, with high crime in the past, invested a lot in police, so it does pay very well if you're able to get that job. You can definitely be in the high end of middle class and be a police officer. You can have a very nice life, money, as a police officer. Thank you.
is that similar to Spain? Or?
Like you have some crime you commit some crime in the past.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's you can't.
Disqualified.
Yep.
It's the same.
Yep.
But they don't pay the same money.
They don't pay as well in Spain.
No.
Okay.
The salary is low.
A lot of former military become police? No?
Any other questions there?
What are the states that register more felonies related with violence? North? South?
Which had more felonies for violence?
Yeah.
generally speaking, in America, the southern U.S. Is more violent than anywhere else in the United States. Some have argued that what we have a subculture of violence in the South, sort of an honor code that sort of compels someone to behave violently when they feel threatened or when they feel confronted or when they try to be dominated. So most of our data suggests that the southern United States tends to have greater levels of violence. The western United States as well, California, the Los Angeles area, but there is so much space in America. We are so large that there is often in places like Alabama or Florida, much empty space. So keep in mind that crime is always concentrated in the urban poor communities, especially urban poor minority communities, and we see a lot of those in the southern United States, but also in the west. But then Detroit in the north, New York City also have very high crime levels, but the south tends to have the highest. It's also where we execute the most people. We give them the death penalty in the south. Many of the northern parts of the United States do not have the death penalty anymore.
America's economy is changing. It's not so good either. And as America's economy changes, less factories, less manufacturing, a lot of the northern cities now, we call it a rust belt, where there used to be lots of factories. Michigan, Chicago, St. Louis, Cleveland, the violence is going up there as well.
Thank you.
But still, come visit.
So any other questions?
Yes. Also,
Please.
I'm just feeling a little bit calm. Not a question, it is just a general. I believe that what you have presented it is very interesting, and it was very interesting to listen to good presentation. Really, I thank you from heart.
Thank you.
From the bottom of heart. But the problem is, in the United States, what problem you have is problem of justice. And you have this problem also internationally. I mean, you refer to education. Education is nothing. The President of the United States is educated in Harvard University, the law faculty, but he's killing. He's one of those people that is wanted, really, in all the world. So it is not education that makes the sense. It is the love of justice which makes the sense. If you count the justice with love, then you can make the peace. Well, otherwise, if you make peace with justice or justice with peace, never you come to the end. So it goes around. So what you are really looking, as you told, it is a protocol that they don't know police officers, they don't know protocols, and they don't know these things. It's very interesting to know. But since I am coming from Sweden, from Stockholm, there is no this problem that you should be a military officer and then you come. This is a cowboy mentality. It is not a matter of education. It is a matter of to understand that the police office is a part of it, and people are the part of the police office. If you come this, what I call this tunnel together, then you will face that there is no problem with the police office and the people. But the problem is you have made from the beginning two goals that they are against each other. Because one should understand that police office is a part of you, and an integral part of you.
Excuse me, we are just, if you have any questions, but
yes.
I think
This
it's
is
not
what,
the place to
yes.
explain your opinion
Sorry.
about, I think it's not the way.
We are criminology professors. Sometimes it's very difficult to teach a topic where you do not want your students to do what they want to do. We sometimes are very happy that our students tell us, I wanted to be a police officer, I took your class, now I do not want to be a police officer anymore. And sometimes that makes us feel very good. Does that mean there will no longer be police? Of course not. But it makes it, we are in a very unique situation. And today we try to give just basic information for students on the research. But your point is very well taken and understood.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So thank you very much for your conference. You are very welcome.